Welcome into the IDP After Show Week 7 preview episode. I'm your host, Jeff Pomazal. We just wrapped up Week 6, and we lost yet another IDP cornerstone and all-pro linebacker, Fred Warner. So not only are we dealing with a growing list of injuries, but we also continue to deal with the bye weeks. Joining me this week is no stranger to the IDP After Show, Mr. Jase Abbey. Jase is coming back to the show as we discuss 14 players ahead of this week's matchups. If that sounds like something you and your teams could use, sit back, listen in, and let's get after it on this episode of the IDP After Show.
This is the IDP After Show.
All right, Jase, let's jump right into these players that we like for Week 7. Who's that defensive lineman that you have a little higher than others at this time?
Jeff, my edge or DL start this week is Jaelan Phillips, and he's here for a couple of reasons. Firstly, he's playing pretty well. He's been a bit unlucky not to get more sacks. Pretty good 16.1% pressure rate, pretty nice 22.8% win rate, and for the PFF fans out there, that translates to a nice looking 80.1 PFF pass rush grade. Not only that, and I think I'm not alone in thinking this, but after Chop Robinson's rookie year and with Bradley Chubb coming back, it kind of looked, to me at least, like it might be more of an even split between those three, but that's not been the case. And it's becoming less so as we get further into the season, because lately Phillips and Chubb have been dominating playing time and Robinson's kind of faded away. So to sum that up, Phillips is playing well, he's getting the playing time, but the production isn't quite there yet. This week, I think, is as good as any for that to change, because the Dolphins have the Browns on Sunday. He would be matched up with Jack Conklin, who's nothing special when healthy, but he is currently banged up. I think it's a concussion. His replacement, if it remains, KT Leverston, is terrible. And of course, there's the rookie at quarterback too. So whoever plays at right tackle, and I don't really care who it is of those two, I think Phillips can have a big game, and I think he can take advantage of this situation.
And he's been a player too that's been in the news for a lot of reasons. There's a lot of trade, there's a lot of teams that are looking for some defensive line help. And I think the three players that you mentioned with Chubb, with Phillips, and with Robinson, they all would benefit if one of these players had a little change of scenery. And so maybe this is like audition for a new team. I know that there's a couple teams across the NFL right now that suffered some injuries at the position that he would be a player, or even moving on for a cheap Bradley Chubb, or, I doubt that Chop Robinson is going anywhere since he's on the cheap rookie deal, but definitely a player to definitely monitor going forward. So, and like you said, playing the Browns is always a get right. Unfortunately, if you're the Dolphins, maybe you're the team that usually is the team to be the get right team against. So what happens if you have two get right teams playing each other at the same time?
That's exactly it.
Somebody has to get right, I guess.
Somebody has. It's going to be Phillips, I swear.
Okay. You heard it here first. All right. Sticking in the state of Florida, my defensive lineman this week is going to be Yaya Diaby. Love the consistency in play over the last 3 weeks. His snaps have been super consistent, which we love to see. 47 snaps, 47 and 44 in the last 3 games. He's got a really nice tackle floor. So even in those leagues, he's not going to leave you with a goose egg. He's had 3 tackles, 2 tackles, and 3 tackles across the last 3 weeks. And so even though he's not maybe getting sacks every game, he's not going to leave you with those like goose egg weeks, which can be really detrimental to your teams. He had 2 sacks last week in a great matchup versus the 49ers. He gets another great matchup this week for defensive linemen against Detroit. We just saw last week Detroit and Kansas City play. George Karlaftis and Chris Jones each came away from the game with a sack. Yaya Diaby could be lined up against Dan Skipper, who is replacing Taylor Decker on that side of the Lions offensive line. And he is very beatable at playing opposite of Penei Sewell. So that the right side of the line might be a little more challenging with Sewell there, but I think that with Decker out with the concussion symptoms I think he has, Skipper becomes a very beatable play there. The other thing too I like with Diaby is we often see sacks come in bunches for players. They kind of get on a hot streak and things like that. And I think we could start to see at the start of a nice little run here for Diaby, who has 2 sacks last week. Like I mentioned, he's got a great matchup this week, and he's got some really favorable matchups leading up to Tampa Bay's bye in week 9. So if he's available on your waiver wire, this might be a great plug and play option, especially as we head into more of the bye weeks.
Yeah, I can't tell you how much I love this shout, Jeff. I love any opportunity to talk about Diaby. I singled him out pre-season back in June as a defensive lineman who could surprise in, I think it was like a overlooked players article I did here for the IDP show. I did that because he was last year in the 97th percentile in pressure rate, 93rd percentile in win rate. Those are elite numbers. I'm not the kind of person to make super bold statements, but he's the one guy I kind of really pinned my hopes on more than any other in recent years to have a bigger season than he'd had before, because as you know, he was really unfortunate in terms of sacks that he had last year. Where I kind of struggle with him this week is this matchup. He would be up against Taylor Decker if Decker plays, as you said, and that would be a tough matchup. We don't really know yet if Decker's playing yet. He was questionable last week before being downgraded to out. So I guess if I had any advice for people listening or watching this, it would be to monitor the Lions practice report towards the end of the week. And if Decker is out, then fire up Diaby, absolutely, as you said. And if Decker is playing, and if you can, consider pivoting to somebody else. But generally speaking, based on what you said, I fully appreciate this as a nomination for a defensive lineman to start this week.
I think we did a preseason show together too, talking about players that we like breakouts, and I think you were all in on the Diaby train, and so you got me all jacked up and fired up about him in August. So I think that just kind of rolled into this episode. So
yeah, I'm usually pretty careful with my advice. I usually offer both the pros and the cons, just telling the whole picture. But with Diaby, I did go all in. So yeah, I'm monitoring him carefully. Very happy to see him put together another big week last week. As you say, sacks seem to come in bunches for him this year, but he's heating up at the right time, and this could be the matchup for him.
Yeah. Yeah, and Detroit's been a really nice matchup for the opposing defensive linemen so far this season. So they play a heavy volume of snaps, and that's going to lead to opportunities, and that's what we like to see. So yeah. I think him and Hassan Reddick are kind of a nice duo there for Tampa. So.
And if we're honest as well, it's not every week they play a team as good as the Lions. It's probably one game script where they are going to get a few more pass rush opportunities than they might do against other teams. So that's another good reason to fire up Diaby this week, right?
Yeah, that's a great point. Very good point. So you got a linebacker here that you like that maybe wasn't even on people's radar last week, but now definitely was a hot name this week. Who's that guy for you, Jase?
Yeah, and I'm not pretending this news escaped anybody. It was big news, of course. Barrett Carter replacing longtime starter Logan Wilson, not only as the full-time linebacker there, but also taking over as the dot wearer too. I'm not going to be that guy and say that I saw this was coming, not as early as this anyway. I did have him in my sort of tier 2 of rookie linebackers behind Schlesinger and Jihad Campbell, but I think, considering how poorly Wilson has been so far and given how the Bengals season's going, down Burrow, losing 4 straight, I don't think it's a bad move on their part to see kind of what he's got at this point, right? The result, of course, looked great last week. His athleticism really showed up. Led the team with 10 tackles. His tackle efficiency, not that it's something I don't think we should read too heavily into at this point, not with so few snaps to kind of lean upon, was incredible. I think he's got a shot to become that guy, to remain that guy, I suppose I should say. That tackle efficiency, as I say, was somewhere 17 to 20%, depending on what data source you follow and trust, and that's awesome to see. That's what we need. It's what we want in fantasy. I do have a couple of reservations, Jeff. The first and least concerning is the missed tackles. He's had a bunch this year, nearly 19% per PFF, but he's still young, he's learning, he's adapting. Missed tackles weren't a problem for him really at Clemson, not in his final year anyway. The bigger reason that I'm worried, I suppose, is how he looks in coverage. That was a problem in his final year in college. So far, it's been a problem for him in the NFL as well, and that's really where Wilson struggled too. But as I said before, we kind of expect this from these first-year guys. He should and could improve in that area with more snaps. And this is, after all, a weekly start sit show. And with that in mind, I'm kind of feeling pretty good about putting his name forward as somebody we should be starting this week, especially against the Steelers defense, which has given up one of the highest tackle efficiency ratings to opposition linebackers this year.
What a Cincinnati move this is too, because they have invested so much on the offensive side of the ball. We've seen it time and time again. Those defensive stars, they're not willing to pay. They're willing to move on. We saw it with Jesse Bates. He's now in Atlanta, and Logan Wilson probably was on his way out, wasn't going to get a new deal after this contract expired. Like you said, didn't see it happening this quickly, but here we are, week 7. They may be already in evaluation mode, seeing what they have already this season. It doesn't look like they're going to be able to make the playoffs ish, right now. So, that front office is doing due diligence right now, and they're doing what they need to be doing in player evaluation and see what they have going into next season. And looking to see what you have in your young rookie pieces is a great way to do that. So,
yeah. Sorry, Cam.
That's okay. I was just going to follow up. Do you feel that they can go back to Wilson at some point? I know that Wilson had a locker room comment that he said he wasn't gonna be the enemy. He was really gonna work and try to help mentor Carter. So I mean, that's great to hear from a teammate standpoint, but that's not getting you any fantasy points on my roster. So
absolutely, and that's what it's all about. I don't think you go back to him at this point. I think that's done. I think they've drawn the line under that now. I think, if anything, Wilson, that's part Wilson just being the consummate pro, and part him maybe auditioning for that next role, because as professional as he's been about this, I can't imagine that he would be content at this point in his career sitting on the bench, not when the trade deadline is fast approaching and not when there's so many other teams out there that are linebacker needy. It might be one of those situations. I always think back in these situations to Devondre Campbell, where they didn't look that great on the team they were in. They go into a new scheme, into a new situation, a change of scenery, suddenly they become fantastic. And yeah, obviously a few years down the line, Campbell wasn't that guy anymore, but it just goes to show that sometimes people just need something different. And I think with him, I don't think he was auditioning really. I think that's just him being a pro. I don't think he'll go back. I think he moves on, if anything.
This won't be the last time we hear Wilson's name in this episode, but just kind of thinking too about like you said, there are some very needy teams, and a change of scenery is a lot of these. All they need sometimes is because look at Devin White, he has just been a revelation for the Raiders, and there were many people early September who were still doubting waiver wire. He was not picked up on a lot of teams, and all of a sudden here he is, he's a every week starter right now without a doubt. So.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And if we're going to talk about who they might move on to, I think Oren Burks is more likely, but that's another conversation.
A player that I'm going to look at for linebacker this week, and it kind of curtails really well off of my Diaby one, is if Taylor Decker plays, maybe Diaby's not the guy to start. But this is if Tyrell Dodson is out again this week, KJ Britt becomes a smash start this week for the Dolphins. Last week with Dodson out with a concussion, he took on a really big role for this team, played 100% of snaps. And those concussion symptoms seem to be lingering longer and longer in the NFL. I don't know if it's part of the protocol that they have, unless you're Jackson Dart, who can get back in 2 plays. But I think that there's a real chance that Dodson is out again this week. And I saw that Jordan Brooks was missing some time at practice today. So regardless, Britt might play a big role this week. He played 61 snaps last week. He converted those 61 snaps into 13 combined tackles. And I know you had preluded about the tackle rate. That's a 21% tackle rate, which we know is impossible to repeat. It's just a super gaudy number. But even if he regresses a little bit, to 14, 15%, that's a fantastic tackle rate number. The Dolphins take on the Browns, like you mentioned earlier, with the defensive linemen. It should be kind of an interesting game because the Browns are a great matchup for opposing linebackers. They're giving up nearly 20 tackles a game to the position, which is fantastic because you're going to see a lot of Quinshon Judkins more than likely. We saw the Browns in England last week. Lots of miles in between, travel there, traveling back, so they might be a little sluggish. They may be looking to kind of pound the rock again this week and kind of get back to who they are. I think they kind of got away from that a little bit last week, trying to be more pass happy. I think it was Judkins' fewest carries since he became a starter there. So I do think there's a chance for some big plays here with that offensive line being as rough as they are for the moment. So, if Terrell Dotson is continuing to miss some time, like KJ Britt might be a great streaming option for you this week. So,
yeah, spot on. Nothing really to add there, Jeff. You covered it all. All I would say is that for as long as that seems to have been lingering, I did notice that Dodson returned to practice this week, and McDaniel said he was kind of trending in the right direction. But we've heard this before, right? And then all of a sudden, these guys do not play. And like you pointed out, they do seem to be playing it very careful when it comes to this sort of thing, as they should do, right? It's a difficult one to call. So yeah, another one of these where monitor the situation, and if they're not heavily involved in practice or practicing in full toward the end of the week, then absolutely fire up KJ Britt.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Jase, is there like 5 steps to the protocol like the player has to pass through, or the different phases of the concussion protocol, I think now? So even just returning to practice, that's a phase of it. It's not like the end all be all. So like you said, they could go to practice, but then, they could have spells or symptoms after practice, and that could reset that clock. So
yeah,
definitely absolutely a player to monitor. So heading to the back end of the defense here, you got a really hot name here at the defensive back position. He's been probably a week 1 waiver wire ad by many teams. So who's that defensive back for you?
Yeah, and I will kind of preface this by saying it's always harder with these DBs than with any other position, because the way a lot of them score their fantasy points, outside of tackles at least, is so much harder to predict, isn't it, than any other position. But Chamarri Conner, he kind of ticks a lot of the boxes in terms of what I look for in a DB, Jeff. From week to week, first and foremost, that full-time role, that's almost a must, with very few exceptions, which I think we'll get onto in a little bit with your nomination. Secondly, the vast majority of those snaps are spent either in the box or in the slot, which again, second tick box. What goes against him is this matchup with the Raiders. I believe he's playing. That hasn't been too kind to safeties in the past, but I'm willing to overlook that for a player like him, because last week, and kind of bucking that trend, I guess 2 of the top 4 tacklers versus the Raiders were safeties, and Conner himself, in a terrible matchup last week, led the team with 13, 14 tackles. So again, it's important we look toward these trends in terms of how these positions are scored against these other teams, but it's also, I think, important that we bear in mind that we are only 7 games into the season for most teams, 6 for those who have already had a bye, and that these trends are not necessarily as accurate as they might be, or as predictive as they might be 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks from now.
And I think it's such a week-to-week league where it is so early with the data. There might be an injury, like we saw the Raiders last week without Brock. Like what does that do to the offense? Does that change things? If he's back this week, does that kind of reset the scheme for the Raiders? Having him play on a team that's probably going to be ahead is great for game script too. We see Conner is that defensive back playing close to the line of scrimmage. He's going to be involved in a lot of plays, and those teams are probably needing to score points. So they're going to be passing, and then that increases volume, that increases opportunity. And that's exactly what we love to see. So I am kind of surprised that Chamarri Conner is the name here and not Jaden Hicks, because I know Hicks was a popular name a couple months ago. He was supposed to be that guy, and then it just never really panned out for him. And he's a player that kind of missed on, because he had a great end of season last year, and kind of the signs were there that he was going to be the next big thing there. But just replace the name Chamarri Conner and Jaden Hicks, and you got your starter. So
don't think you were alone in that way of thinking, Jeff. I think a lot of people thought similarly. Conner was this kind of X factor, because no one really knew where he kind of plugged into the equation there. But yeah, he seems to be the hot hand for now. So let's ride that while we can.
Speaking of hot hand right now, there's probably not a hotter player on the defense side of the ball than Marcus Jones. he's just been a big play scoring machine the last 3 weeks. In Big Three scoring, he had 28.4 points, 21.0 points, 23.6 points over the last 3 weeks. He's got 16 combined tackles, a sack, and an interception, which in its own right is great for the defensive back position. But he's also getting this cheat code where he's returning kicks. He's returned 9 kicks over the 3 games for 209 yards and a touchdown. So if you're playing in a league that rewards return yardage, you're getting this defensive player right now who is really involved because New England's offense is really clicking. So again, just like Conner, these teams are playing catch up. So he becomes more involved in the plays. Now he gets this uptick, like maybe 3 or 4 points more from the return yardage. So now all of a sudden you have this like almost what we were hoping Travis Hunter was going to be, this kind of cheat code play. So playing Tennessee this week, I know it's not great for offensive drives, but here again, game script could play a factor for Jones. We know that Ward is more than capable of throwing up a ball to get picked off. I know that Jones plays on the outside and he's not really playing those slot snaps that we really are chasing right now, but he's such a hot name right now and a hot play. Like he's finding ways to make impacts in games. I know that Tennessee also has a new coach and they're going to try to establish this new culture maybe. So we might see this kind of shift in game planning, but we also know that when there's a shift mid-season, that's not always successful. And so that's kind of a play to chase as well too, because if the offense is going to be struggling, that means the defense could take advantage of that. And so Jones right now is a player that's been definitely taking advantage of that. The Patriots team defense is playing really well. They're 7th in scoring over the last 3 weeks as well. So you factor all those things together. I feel really good starting him as my 3rd defensive back, but even this week, if I need a home run in my matchup, I'm not opposed to starting him as a defensive back too.
Yeah, spot on. Right. He's the only way in which Jones isn't a star in your IDP leagues is if you don't reward return yardage, and if that's you, then kind of what are you doing? Speak to your commissioner, right? He's not a full-time guy, and this is as I alluded to earlier a moment ago, that maybe the one exception where you can look beyond that, because when he does play, he plays predominantly in the slot, which is nice. And even though he's not a full-time guy, he's getting that return yardage. And this year, with those dynamic returns, it kind of counts, doesn't it? Really, and it's making a bit of a difference, I think, in a lot of leagues where people have kind of been surprised by that and overlooked that. And some of us have got the jump on those people by picking up these guys who do returns. Yeah. I'm all in on Jones. Really like this call. He came up as available in quite a few of the leagues that I'm in, because I haven't double checked this. I'm assuming his tackles or his return yardage wasn't where it needed to be from the get go. It certainly is now. Great shout. Yeah,
he's definitely turned it up the last 3 weeks. On the defensive side of the ball, I think he even had a pick 6 thrown in there too, so he's scoring in a lot of ways. And there was even some rumors about him possibly getting in on the offensive side of the ball. So like he was one of those guys that was like, hey, whatever you need, coach, I'm ready to do it. So like, oh man, that could be even more salivating going on if we can get a little offensive run here. So is he the guy? Remind me, Jeff. Is he the guy who the former offensive coordinator didn't know had ever played offense before, and yes,
Jones had to remind him? I forget who the OC's name was.
Yep.
Yeah, he's not there.
This was a Marcus Jones call when we were preseason too, right? I think it was the same episode as Diaby. So I promise this is a completely different episode. This is not a rinse and repeat. So
we just replaced preseason with week 7 here,
right?
And just rehashed it. It goes to show how salient our advice was at the time. That it's still relevant 7 weeks on, though, right? So
So make sure you listen to us in August. You can save yourself a week 7 preview. So
we'll be talking about Diaby and Jones again.
Yep,
reminding you that you should have picked them up 18 weeks ago. Hey ho.
Look at us go. So just kind of recapping the players that were a little higher on this week at the defensive line position: Jaelan Phillips and Yaya Diaby. Linebackers that we really like this week are Barrett Carter, and if Tyrell Dodson is out, KJ Britt. And then we got Chamarri Conner and Marcus Jones at the defensive back position. So flipping the script here a little, Jase. Now we're going to talk about some players that were probably fading a little bit compared to consensus. Players that maybe like, they're a too high. And so who's a player on the defensive line that you think is too high this week?
Yeah, and I'm leaving myself wide open to being wrong here, more so than normal, by nominating an entire group of players on a single team. And I've gone with the Cowboys edge rushers this week. Given how they kind of split time between one edge and the other, I think that the top two guys there, Sam Williams and Aziriaku, it's kind of hard to isolate one player against the weaker of the two Commanders' offensive tackles, but I don't really care. Tunsil's, yes, playing much better on one side than Connolly is on the other, but really none of these Cowboys edges is lighting it up right now. James Houston's been the most productive, and that's really only because he's converted half of his 8 pressures into 4 sacks, which is, as we know, unsustainable. Jaden Daniels is playing with a bit more confidence this year. He's got more confidence in that knee as the weeks go by. It's probably going to be, I think, a blown assignment or just great coverage downfield that kind of leads to a sack on him. And we know, I think, given the way this Cowboys secondary is playing, that he's probably not going to struggle to find open men downfield, especially if McLaurin is back this week. So yeah, I'm kind of fading all of these Cowboys edge rushes for this week. Just don't see it.
Is there one of these players you like a little more than all of them? So if you had to pick one, who's that player that you might start?
For the week, given the snap share and the talent, I suppose, Sam Williams, and I know this isn't a dynasty focused pod. I do like Aziriaku. I think he's done well to earn the role that he's currently got, and he's not been terrible. Last week was probably one of his better weeks, but yeah, none for this week. If I had to choose one for this week, it'd be Sam Williams.
Okay. And you make a great point with the dynasty aspect. There's so many managers right now who are panicking with their defensive players. Like, they're rookies for a reason. It's a big learning curve going from college to pros. And if you're, 4th or 5th round defensive lineman that you drafted, if you drafted Aziraku or if you drafted Jalen Walker or even, Michael Williams, they're going to take some time. It's not a transition from college and they're going to do the same thing in the pros. So, even Mike Green, he was at an amazing 17 sack season in college. He is not going to sniff that right now for the Ravens. So it's going to take some time. So be patient with those players. Don't panic sell.
Love that advice. And it's really easy to get caught up in the elite few and expect everyone else to follow suit. Schwessinger's the perfect example. He's kind of hit the ground running. Campbell's the same. We expect and we judge others by the same standard. So when we come to the people like Barrett Carter, who we talked about earlier on, Demetrius Knight, if they're not playing at a super high level, we get panicky and we get worried and we shift them, we move them too quickly, or we don't go out and trade for those guys when we know that in time they probably are going to hit their stride. And more often than not, these guys who we truly believe in for all the right reasons will find their way in time. 7 games is nothing.
Yep. And it seems very much that's the approach right now, even with pros. I know you're in the chat groups too, Jay. So you hear a lot of the Myles Garrett, the Aiden Hutchinson chatter about they're not doing, their sits this week and their fades, and they're highly drafted for a reason. It's you got to play the long game here, and it's not, players are going to hit a cold snap here in a couple weeks in a row, but then they're going to get hot. And, I would rather sit and wait through those cold snaps to enjoy the hot snaps as well. So
people love these super reactive, comments that people make. It's kind of what fantasy advice is almost built on, outside of the IDP show, of course, where a star player has one down week. Who cares? Every single player has a down week, whether that be the best player that's ever played at that position or not. It's the way it goes. Just weather them out. You never sit Hutchinson, you never sit Garrett. These people that suggest these things, if they have those players in those leagues, I bet you they're not sitting them themselves.
Right. Maybe they're trying to get their buy window, so they're trying to like down talk them a little bit to get that window. So
this is it. We're playing it all wrong. We should be doing exactly the same.
Right. I would send this out to my league mates all right now. So
they're one step ahead of us, Jeff, not one step behind.
Right.
Never thought of it that way.
Yeah. Game changer. Yep. So a player that's been no stranger to this weekly preview show has been Carl Granderson, and he's been on both sides of the conversation. He's been a player to start. He's been a player to fade. And so this week he makes his return as a player to fade this week. And it's not so much more to do with Granderson himself, because Granderson has been like a really feast or famine type player this season. He's done really, really well in his good matchups, but he's just been a total ghost in those tougher matchups. Started off the season super hot. He had back-to-back weeks with 20 plus points and big three scoring. Everyone was like, all in, here we go. It's all season long. And then all of a sudden we hit this like rough patch like we talked about. He had a nice rebound week a couple weeks ago. He goes in against this week against Chicago, who's a really tough matchup for opposing defensive linemen. They've only allowed 2 sacks. Their offensive line has only given up 4 sacks as a team this year. He's doing a lot of this on his own because that whole defensive line has just been decimated. Chase Young has played very little. This allows offensive coordinators to kind of scheme away from players. It kind of schemes. They can have a player to chip and kind of do those kind of things to kind of eliminate them from the game plan. So I don't think this is so much like a Granderson thing as it is like just a matchup play. Chicago is not a team that you're getting sacks on with Caleb Williams. So he's a player that I'm going to try to fade this week, especially after a 1-point outing last week.
Yeah, I hear you. And I sometimes struggle with Granderson. I forget every year. Here's a journey I kind of go through with Granderson. I look at his end production. It looks quite nice. I'm like, oh, that's pretty good. Look at his pressure rates. Think, oh, well, that's not all that hot. How has he ended up with this production? Is he one of those rare players that bucks a trend? And then I look at the pass rush snaps year on year, and invariably he's always near or fairly near the top. It's a production thing. A volume thing, and it's because there's nobody really else there to take his place. So yeah, I'm not a massive fan. Chase Young's back in the picture again this week, as we know. Cameron Jordan's role took more of a hit, I guess, or his snaps at the edge spot, I suppose, took more of a hit than Granderson's last week. But even so, I mean, as you say, the Bears and Caleb Williams, they're just not giving up as many sacks this year, even though the upgrades they made were invariably on the interior of that offensive line. It kind of speaks to how the offensive tackles were getting criticized, and in actual fact it was more of a Williams thing than them last year. But yeah, by the by, they're not giving up as many sacks this year. You kind of have to think the game script kind of works in the Bears' favor here, and Williams' favor, and against Granderson as well, right? So yeah, I'm on board.
I'm kind of picturing when you were talking about where you were with the Granderson thing, like if you're a fan of any sports team, you've all seen the memes where like it's the circle and you all go through like, where are you right now in that part of the journey? Like here's Jase with the Granderson. He's like right here right now. He's like, is he really questioning like how good he's playing or where we are? So yeah.
He fits squarely into that bracket. I go through a similar journey with a lot of players every year. DJ Wanham is the other one. I look at his final year production. I'm like, how the hell's this guy managed to get this many sacks? Granderson's another one of those. Granderson's better than Wanham. In fact, everybody else is better than Wanham, who's currently playing edge in the league. But yeah, he definitely falls into that bracket where it's a production thing, not a talent thing. I will say on that point though, Jeff, his snap share, his volume at the moment in the last couple of weeks has been massive, and if that continues, then he might continue to be the player that we've seen in previous years that doesn't seem to generate a ton of pressure, doesn't seem to beat blockers at an absurdly high rate, and yet still ends up with pretty good production. It would be unfair if that were the case, but if we were to sit him for 1 week, coming back to your first point, this would be the week to do it.
And it's kind of one of those things too, where like the best kind of ability is the availability, and Granderson has done that. And so at some point, he's going to have those spike weeks where he falls into a sack and things like that. And so Granderson probably is like a player, like if I'm starting 3 or more defensive linemen yes, because then I'll have like the other players that I can build like a safe floor with. But if I'm in a league that's starting like 2 defensive linemen, like he's really boom bust for me this week. So,
yep, right there with you.
all right. So a player that you actually got to see play last week in person is a player that you're not a big fan of this week. So tell us about your linebacker to fade.
Yeah, and this for me is really low hanging fruit, Jeff. Nobody had Strnad, Broncos linebacker in their lineup last week, but I wanted to mention him because someone might have been tempted to add him, or even I think maybe start him this week after what might have looked like a big game last week. He had a couple of sacks, but and yeah,
everybody had a sack for the Broncos last week.
That's it. I was at that game, and I can pretty confidently say that I could have sacked Fields in that game. And I'm in my 40s. I've got 2 dodgy knees, and I'm dealing with the fallout from sciatica. So, yeah, it's no reason to go out and pick up and or start Strnad. The second reason I've got him here though is because Greenlaw is eligible to return from IR this week, and we're recording this before any news about whether Greenlaw has practiced today has come out. So I don't really have the benefit of knowing whether he was involved or not. But honestly, it doesn't really matter to me or not. Because there's a third reason as well, and that reason is the matchup. I don't like Strnad's matchup. The Giants D haven't been a good team for opposition linebackers in terms of tackle numbers. I can think of more and more reasons, but I'm going to leave it at those 3 as to why we don't want Strnad in our lineups. Don't start him. Don't add him. Drop him, in fact.
I think you're being pretty modest when you said you were at the game. You just weren't at the game last week. What was your role with the game last week that you got to?
Yeah, I was covering the game last week. I was up in the press box, and even though I was like busy trying to write an article throughout the course of the game, I was able to keep an eye on the game enough to know that Strnad was not impactful in any way that I couldn't have been if I was just stood out there and barely moving, Jeff. So yeah, he's not the player for you this week. His tackle numbers going back weeks, dreadful, pitiful. I can't remember the exact percentage figures I was looking at earlier on, but it's like 5-6%. That's just bizarre. And as I say, were it not for the sacks, I wouldn't even need to have mentioned him because nobody would have been considering. Yep. Contemplating picking him up and starting him if even if they were desperate for linebacker help. But those couple of sacks, made me want to try and help others avert trying to fall into this trap.
Help me help you.
Sorry, Rod Tidwell.
It seems like every season his name pops up as like a waiver wire name. He has a couple of these pop games. Like he has this role for the Broncos. He has this role in the NFL. Like every week 7, week 8 time of year he rolls around, like his name pops up and he's like, do I add him? Do I not? You know, like, so maybe you have to go back to your Carl Granderson take and just be like where you are in the cycle of life with Granderson. You have the cycle of life of Strnad too. So
yeah, you're right. Absolutely right. Last year, you know, if I think the litmus test has got to be if Quan Alexander and Drew Sanders are starting to eat into your snap share, then you know this is not the player that you need to have in your lineup, as was the case last year. He just falls into a role. I sound like I hate Strnad. I don't.
Yeah,
I just hate him for IDP.
Poor guy. Oh, what did he do to you? Do you take your cab after the game or something? You took your Uber? So take this, Justin Strnad. All right. A player that I am fading this week and probably most of the season is Trevin Wallace. He's kind of having the definition of a meh season, like no big splash plays at all, no sacks, no fumbles, no interceptions, literally nothing except absorbing a couple tackles a game. 5 tackles, 3 tackles, 5 tackles, 5 tackles, 6 tackles, 4 tackles. Nothing else. He's playing 100% of snaps, which we love to see, and we chase volume, so he does have that in his favor. But over the last 2 weeks, I don't know if it's just because there isn't anyone else to play there. Even Christian Roseboom is equally as meh in the linebacker room. Um, and they're both kind of playing this like Roseboom started off with 100% of snaps, and Wallace was playing 80% of snaps. Now they kind of flipped the roles, but with neither of them really doing anything spectacular, we could easily see that role flip back to Roseboom playing 100% of snaps and Wallace playing 80%. Taking on the Jets this week, who we were like, oh, this is going to be a lot of sack fest, but they don't have the defensive line that Denver does, and so I don't think there's going to be that opportunity for this group. The Jets are also probably going to be without Garrett Wilson this week, so we might see a little bit heavier uptick for Mason Taylor, but he did only have one grab last week, and the Jets seem to be in turmoil. There's players that want to out. They're questioning the coaches on the sideline. That is just not a recipe for success on the offensive side of the ball. And when you don't have success on the offensive side of the ball, it's really hard to have long drives and opportunities for our defensive players to make tackles. And I just don't see that happening this week for the Jets. The Jets have been a pretty decent matchup for opposing linebackers in the first few weeks of the season. But I think you would agree, like watching them last week, we just saw Singleton kind of disappear last week. And if it wasn't for the sacks, they probably wouldn't have the stats they did last week. I know that Wallace is kind of listed as a linebacker 4 this week, and I think that's being really, really generous. If I have to start maybe 5 linebackers, I'll consider him with the buys and the injuries that are happening right now. But I'd much rather roll out like a Drake Thomas this week over him, just because he's got a little bit different role, and he's getting the sacks and big plays where Trevin Wallace is not.
Yeah, and it may sound like we're going against our sort of general rule of thumb where we say start these full-time linebackers because they are, or generally speaking, over the course of the last 10 years, becoming increasingly more scarce. He should definitely be rostered, but yeah, this tackle efficiency is definitely a concern, especially when you look back to last year and see that it wasn't much different there either. Even though he wasn't a full-time guy, it was still hovering around that sort of 10% mark, which doesn't give you a startable asset. I would to throw another name out there, someone like a Devin Bush, who isn't playing every snap, but who is performing when he's out there. Some people just suit schemes. Some schemes don't suit certain positions. This seems to be a failing situation for Trevin Wallace from an IDP perspective. So no arguments here.
I just wonder how big of a difference, like a Josie Jewell, if he wouldn't have suffered the injuries that he did preseason and was let go, how different this linebacking core might be. Because, Jewell is probably a tier above Wallace and Roseboom as far as players go. So it'd just be kind of interesting to see where we would be with the injuries. Maybe Jewell would make this a little bit more appealing position on Carolina, but yeah, I'm not interested really in either of these players. So.
Yeah, and it's hard, isn't it? Because there's so many moving parts to compare players like this. Jewell was more productive, generally speaking. But I guess last year there was no Derek Brown for long stretches. So, he's a tackle hog, a tackle hoover, in which case maybe there'll be less to go around. I don't know. What I do know is that you're probably right with your advice with Wallace to not start him. You can't drop him because he's a full-time linebacker. And he could pop off just 1 week, and then you could like pivot that into potentially trying to trade him to somebody else and point out that he is a full-time linebacker and he just needed to find his feet. But no, he's not a startable asset. Especially not this week when there's only 2. Is there 2 teams on a bye this week? Maybe weeks 8 and 9 when I think there's 6 and 4. Those are the weeks when he might be a startable asset, but not this week.
So moving to the secondary, Jase, who's a defensive back that you're kind of slow rolling into week 7?
Yeah, I'm a Chargers fan, so it takes a lot for me to say this, but I'm also really honest a lot of the time, Jeff, about the Chargers when I hear them touted as being contenders and top 5 in power rankings. It's Tony Jefferson, DB. Unlike some of my other nominations outside of maybe Strnad, this one is really, really straightforward because I think when Alohi Gilman was traded to the Ravens, some people thought that, or might have thought that Jefferson would have stepped in and played a much bigger role. And actually he did, but Elijah Molden just played more. Jefferson was on the field for only 64% of the snaps last week, spent most of those in a deep role, only had a couple of tackles. I wouldn't even mention him, to be honest with you, though, had he not come away with an interception. And not dissimilarly to Strnad, I started to worry that others might fall into a trap where they just assumed, especially in this case, that he had inherited a bigger role with Gilman gone. That wasn't the case. He only produced because he had that interception, and this is a trap. Do not start him.
I think that we have in our leagues, we know who the box score watchers are, and they'll add every week. The waivers will be the top player scoring a position, regardless of how they came across their points. And like Jefferson, my player falls right into that line of thinking too. It's Geno Stone. Mm-hmm. He's coming off a huge week, and it might be tough to start him. But when you look at like how he scored his points, he had 3 tackles last week, but he had a sack and an interception. And so in a scoring system like Big Three, like that vaults his points way up. That was the most points he has scored since last season, week 15. And so we're almost to the halfway point here of this season, a third of the way through the season. And if we have to go back to last season to have a higher point total, that's kind of a little bit concerning. Stone kind of has this history of having 2 monster games over the course of his 5-year career. He just delivered one of those. So are we more than likely to see that in back-to-back weeks? Probably not. Prior to this past week, Stone didn't have any big plays. He was just relying on tackle numbers for his points. There were 3 games this season. He had less than 10 fantasy football points in them. He had the other 2 were 10.7 and 11 points. So not overly, winning you weeks. And so he just kind of has been like this, like, name that's been showing up because he's in a good position to score points, but he just really hasn't. I think he's kind of being propped up right now as a defensive back 3 because of last week, but I think that's his absolute ceiling. And I don't know if the matchup this week is all that great versus Pittsburgh. They're not a very good team against opposing secondary for whatever reason. I know that the linebackers score really well against them, but for whatever reason, the secondary just doesn't seem to do as well. So,
yep. And I'm sorry to say, but yeah, no complaints here. You covered every point that I would make about the same player. Even if we ignore the sack and the interception, the tackle production hasn't been there. I have a slight preference for Jordan Battle, but I've even cooled on him a little bit, I guess.
It's interesting how much we've kind of changed from looking for those like strong safety roles. Now we're almost in this like mindset, like we need the slot corner position, if we're looking for that, so that's where Dax Hill all of a sudden becomes this like maybe the most valuable piece in the secondary for fantasy purposes. So
yeah, absolutely. And if you'd have thought about how these 2 players were perceived, I guess, before the season started, you might have assumed that Battle might be the more in the box guy and that Stone might have been the deeper safety, but there's barely anything in between, in how they're being used. I haven't got the stats in front of me, but yeah, if you were to look at them, I imagine their roles would be almost identical to one another. And like you say, Dax Hill is the guy you want now.
Yeah. So Evan Ringler might not like this, Jase. I think that he's going to be kind of doing a little pushback. He might unfriend you, or you might not get a Christmas card. But who's a player that you're just kind of shaking your head at this season and just can't figure out what to do with because of production, because of snaps, or whatever? Who's that player?
Yeah, this player is actually a player I love, and I've been trying to trade for in a league that I'm in. He's on the trade block, and the other managers will not give me him, despite the fact that he's been completely unproductive this year. It's Dexter Lawrence, Giants DT. I'm a huge fan. I've loved watching him become the player he has over the past few seasons, but this year just hasn't been his year at all. I could be wrong. Again, I don't have the stats in front of me. I don't think he's got a single sack. I don't think he's had more than 2-3 pressures in a single game this year, and it's just confusing as hell as to why. His role has changed slightly. I know that much. He's playing more in the B gap than he was previously. He was one of those bizarre examples of a player who can play more in the A gap and actually continue to produce in ways that those sorts of players never could do in the past. But yeah, his production's right down. His underlying metrics are also right down. The pressure rate's right down too. It's baffling as to why, beyond, as I say, that slight role change. But I will say he's, and this is why it's difficult. This is why he's my confusing player nomination of the week, really, Jeff. He is incredibly talented. He's not as if he's playing terribly. He's just not playing as well as he normally plays, and that's the key point I want people to take away from this. So, whilst this isn't a show where we talk about people you want to go out and buy, if you're in a DT required league and you do use sort of DT premium scoring, then I would be, and I am, trying to go out and trying to buy someone like a Dexter Lawrence, because I think this is as bad as we'll see from him, and he will get better. But right now, makes him really hard to start because we're just not seeing the usual Lawrence.
And he's almost one of those players, too, that if you do play in a defensive tackle required league, the investment that you put into Lawrence, he almost is like that set it and forget it type player. Like, you can't really afford to take him out because there aren't a lot of options at the position. And the 1 week you do bench him, he's going to figure it out and he's going to go off, and then you're going to be upset with yourself for taking him out. So,
oh, absolutely. I was going to say the same thing. The week you take him out, with a week he'll explode with 3 sacks and like 10 pressures and like 6 tackles and a forced fumble. Might even like do a Jordan Davis and like return a fumble recovery for a touchdown. Who knows? I'm taking this to the nth degree, but yeah, it's true. We sometimes take these players out at exactly the wrong time. Yep. I wouldn't take him out, not at a position where difference makers are so scarce. Like I say, he's not playing terribly. He's just not playing near his normal level. It just looks worse than it would be had he at least got 1 or 2 sacks so far.
Yep.
It's going to happen. It's just a question. It's just a question on when, I suppose.
Right. A player that has me confused, and we kind of teased him out a little earlier, it's Logan Wilson. I know I feel like I'm bashing the Bengals tonight in this episode because I mentioned it more than once, but Logan Wilson lost his job. We didn't predict it happening as soon as it did, but here we are. It doesn't seem that he's going to be getting it back. Like you mentioned with Carter before, he's wearing the green dot now. It seemed like in that locker room interview, Wilson was kind of waving the white flag with the job. He's going to be the humble teammate and help out. He doesn't look like he's going to be in a position to get that job back anymore. And being a great teammate is awesome, but like we said earlier, that's not scoring me any points on Sundays or on Mondays or on Thursdays or whatever the night the Bengals happen to be playing. Thursday this week. But I know that his name still carries a lot of value because he was a player that was drafted early at the position. This would be a great time to get out from under any Wilson shares that you have. He does carry that name recognition. He did score some points last week, so an unknowing manager might look at that and be like, oh, he just had a down week. He's still being ranked over on Fantasy Pros as a linebacker 4 or 5 this week, which is kind of crazy considering he legit lost his job. Very unstartable at this time of the year, or right now. So for a player like Wilson who has the name value, he's definitely a player to get out from under of because his PFF scores are a lot like the color of his jersey right now, lots of oranges, which is never a good thing to have by your name according to PFF. So yeah, if you can get out from under Wilson right now, I'd strongly advise trying to, even if you have to take a loss on it, just to kind of get out from there. But with that said, he could get traded to a team. We got the trade deadline approaching here in like a couple weeks here. So a new team could be, advantageous for him to maybe turn things around. Are you interested at all, Jase, at buying any shares of Logan Wilson, or are you kind of seeing enough from him?
It depends on the value, right? And it's such an obvious reply. Sorry, Jeff, really unhelpful reply to your question, but I wouldn't be averse to buying Wilson. I'd need to have it need to be in one of the leagues where my roster's big enough that I could afford to just carry him were he not to get traded, because otherwise he's, if he doesn't get traded, he's dead weight for the entire year. And then in that case, I've given up some draft capital or another player to just carry a player on an otherwise, on a shallow roster for for the next 12 months. But I wouldn't be averse to trade him for the right price. What that price would be, I guess, is the follow-up question. And I don't really know. Again, that really depends on the kind of league size, format that we're talking about as well. I would be surprised if he weren't traded at this point. I would be surprised, as we said earlier on, if the Bengals went back to him. That would feel like a really backward step for them to make, especially after investing a 4th-round pick in Carter. It's almost like you continue to play him until not till the wheels fall off, until you get to the end of the year. And if he's still not begun to show any improvement, then you go into a different direction, or maybe, as I said earlier on, maybe look at Burks. But yeah, Wilson, I would trade for him, but it would need to not be very much that I'd be trading for him. I'd really be pushing back hard on the other manager, pointing out that this is a guy who's is in the twilight of his career, who's been terrible. I'd be finding every reason to point out, every excuse, every angle that worked in my favor to make sure that the value I was giving up was the least possible. But he's not horrifically old. I wouldn't be surprised if he's not starting I wouldn't be surprised if he was starting somewhere else this season, at the very latest next season, somewhere else. Would you?
No, not at all. I'm just in my head thinking of teams that are kind of in that desperation mode for linebackers right now. San Francisco obviously comes to mind, losing Warner. Even a team like Tampa Bay might be a team, with Sylvester Dennis kind of like him and hawing there. Levante David's probably like in his last season of his career. Those are teams that definitely could do it. More than likely, he's going to end up on Philadelphia just because that's what Philadelphia does, is just take these players and stuff like that. But yeah, he's just a player that's kind of like didn't see it happening as quickly as it did. Like you said, great analogy. The wheels fell off really quick. There was no squeaking, grinding, rumbling. It was like, boom, they're gone. So just a player I didn't expect to see that happening this quickly. And that trade deadline is on November 4th. So we're looking at probably about 2.5 weeks away, so we've got 2 more weeks of NFL games before that trade deadline happens. So looking to see some players kind of on the move, maybe change some values here. So
love the 49ers call, I will say. They're a team that's very much in contention. I doubt they had any intention of starting Tatum, Bethune. They clearly don't believe in Nick Martin, otherwise he would at least have been dressed recently. That just seems to make a huge amount of sense to me. Even if Wilson only buys them a couple of weeks until they can maybe feel a bit more confident in one of the younger guys. I can't imagine them being happy riding with a guy who's played 100 defensive snaps and another guy who's played none as a full-time linebacker for the rest of the year, no matter what their positive comments they're making about Bethune right now. It just doesn't seem to make sense to me. Wilson's got to be the better option.
And I think I saw that he was wearing the green dot in practice even today. So Bethune was. So that was, even over winter. So that was kind of crazy times. Crazy times we live in, Jase. So
it really is. Hey, there it is.
So, Jase, at the end of this episode here, we kind of like give you a chance to kind of give some sage advice to the listeners. What are some like tricks of the trade that you've picked up across your experiences in leagues? What are you doing right now with rosters? How are you handling like a 5-1 team, a 1-5 team? Are the approaches the same? Are they different? What are your thoughts? What do you got?
Yeah, and it might sound like I'm sort of peddling old advice again here, but it's advice I truly believe in. If you're 1-5, you're 1-5 for a reason. Either you've got awful injuries, or your team's just not that good. Don't be the last manager to decide to do a rebuild, because at that point there, you probably lost your opportunity to get as much draft capital back as you can for those sort of aging, but the kind of players you don't want to have on your roster next year. I'm in that exact position in one of the leagues I'm in currently, where despite being something like the 4th, 5th top scorer out of 16 teams, I've had like 500 points more scored against me than any other team in that league. I just bite the bullet, just decide that I'm not going to make the playoffs. It's very unlikely. And if I were to do a mini rebuild, keep my key assets, the youngest guys, and trade away maybe some of the older guys, the guys who are in contract years that I'm not convinced can continue to be great next year on another team, then I can recoup some really good draft capital. And to call it a rebuild is wrong, but I don't know what's the other word I'm looking for here, Jeff, where I can capitalize on one bad year and really push on next year and
like a retool or a reboot.
Retool. I like retool. Yeah. That's probably in the most convoluted way possible to explain my biggest advice is never be the last guy to decide to rebuild. The other point I would say is, and this is definitely cliche, is don't give up on these rookies too soon, especially if you really believed in them in that pre-draft process. They might have landed in awful situations where they were never gonna, see incredible snap volume and opportunities from the get-go. Give them a bit of time, especially if you truly believed in them.
Yeah, and like you said, if you're a rebuilding or retooling team anyway, what better piece to build around than those young players that are going to need some maturity, need some saturation just to like get to a spot to be productive NFL players. So no reason to sell off them too early. So
yeah, and at risk of speaking too much here, if you're going to rebuild, please don't stock up on shed loads of DBs that are very easy to find. Go and find I forget the name of the Bears rookie running back, Monongai. Go and find the Tyjae Spears. Get these young guys who stand a very tough. It's very unlikely they're going to be the guy next year, but there's an outside chance they could be. In which case, you're much better having those guys loaded up on your roster than some third string, fourth string defensive back who might be very good at his position, but he's not at a premium position.
Well, I know we're a defensive podcast, but just thinking about the running back, like Kamani Vidal is all of a sudden the flavor of the week, and he's a player that 2 weeks ago was probably 3-4% rostered, and now all of a sudden he's the Woody Marks flavor of the week came and went, and so it's such a viable and volatile position that to invest in. It's kind of like the stock market a little bit. You just got to strike it and make sure you sell high. So
absolutely, you're spot on.
Jase, before we put a ribbon on this episode, what are you working on right now, and where can the fantastic audience find some more of your work?
Here with the IDP show, Jason King, the wonderful Jason King, I should say, alternating on a sort of a twice monthly article series where we dig into kind of various dynasty topics. Overlooked future stars was the topic 1 week. Opportunity buys was another, and really everything in between. I'm also continuing a weekly sort of IDP improvements article series over at DLF called IDP Improvements, funnily enough, where I kind of talk about the trades, drops, ads, stashes that managers should be making to stay ahead of the game. And as Jeff, I have no social life to speak of. My full-time job as of early this year is over at DAZN, where I spend my days writing about NFL news, college football, a little bit of fantasy football, and who, as you mentioned earlier on, are kind enough to let me go to and cover these London games. It's a dream gig. Nothing but NFL for me right now.
And so you got to go to the game last week, and then this week you also get to go, right? You get to go to.
Yep, I'll be down at Wembley this weekend watching the Jags and the Rams. It's going to be. I'm excited because at the start of the year, or at least when it was announced, I thought this is going to be a really one-sided game. But here we are, two 4-2 teams. So let's see where it goes. Hoping for a good one. Hoping it's not going to be a defensive slugfest like the Broncos Jets was. But
that was a tough watch. That was a tough ticket. So
I'd say it was tough for everyone else, but as a lover of defense, 9 sacks, I can't complain. I was happy.
just not Justin Strnad. So you're good.
No.
How is it different being like in that position, that role, than like just like, because you've gone to games as a fan, obviously, but then like what was different for you being in that position?
super odd, I suppose. I suppose the biggest difference was not being able to just fully engross yourself in the joy of the game, as opposed you got a job to do, I suppose, and you're there to make sure you do that job. But there's, on the flip side of that, it's fun in a very different way, because you get to speak to some pretty cool people and see some pretty cool people, and to go pitch side and to go to those press conferences, and that's a whole different angle that you wouldn't normally get to see. So got to do an interview with Jason Bell, who won a Super Bowl with the Giants. It was the year of the David Tyree helmet catch.
Oh, sure.
And he was just the loveliest guy, talking about how he had he knew Patrick Surtain's dad and had practiced with Pat Surtain Jr., I guess, during the off season and things like this. So his insight was really cool to hear, as was his sort of view on what the Jets need to do next, and so on and so forth. It was just the best time, Jeff. Very cool, very fun, just in a very different way than it would be as a fan, where you're there just for a good time.
Sure. And what a neat perspective too, to get that you wouldn't get from being just the fan of the game, but just having that ability to have those conversations and see that insight. And what a neat thing to see a player that has I don't want to say transcended the game, but has been on the senior of Pat Surtain and now the junior piece. He's kind of lived that whole life of that. So what a cool story.
Yeah. And as I say, just the loveliest of guys as well. So yeah,
cool.
So much fun. Yeah. These UK games are something else. Really are. Everyone gets so into it. Yeah. And to see it evolve as I have over I guess I went to the first game, which I think was Giants Dolphins. My dad and I sat behind the field goal, had absolutely no perspective whatsoever on on the yardage, because you can't get a sense of the perspective.
Everything's coming right at you.
It looks like a player's just run for 3 yards, and they call they've run for 15. Whatever. It was the best of days, and I've loved going ever since. They're a lot of fun.
The energy, watching it on TV, the foreign games, or however you want to say, the international games, just the energy that the crowd has. It's just, the fourth quarter when they're singing Kentucky Road and stuff like that. It's just everybody's belting it out. It's just a really cool experience, even just as a fan perspective watching that. So.
Oh yeah, there was one moment when I think Fields had just completed a pass. I think it might have been the first time he was in positive yardage,
and the only time probably
close toward the end of the second quarter, and the cheers. Yes, they were kind of sarcastic cheers, I suppose, but yeah, it's kind of and that's something that Bell talked about, was just how much energy the crowd gives the players. That's really lovely to hear. People are crazy for it over here, Jeff. It's really cool to see.
And following up with that, Aaron Rodgers had a quote too. He said, playing games in the States is different because there's the ebbs and flows of the games where the crowd's really into it. But he said that the international games, it's all game long. It's warm-ups to at the post game. It's just energy the whole time. He says it's a really neat thing to experience. So.
Yeah, I guess we don't get the joy of having a game here every week. So when we do get one, it's even more of a treat than it would be. Yep. It's not an every weekend thing. So we really make the most of it. But and I know that for people back in the States, it's a massive inconvenience, especially if they're on the wrong coast, to have these games happening in the early hours of the morning. But believe me when I say that we truly appreciate it and really make the most of it. And it couldn't be celebrated more than it is right now. It's a lot of fun.
Not to go on a tangent here with that, but the international fan, people in the United States are spoiled when it comes to being catered to about time zone. I know there's the whole East Coast dad, West Coast dad thing with the games and stuff like that, but unless you travel internationally or an international fan, you have no idea what the experience is like. I remember we had taken a trip to Australia during the NBA finals. It was like 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. And we were like at what would it be, like a Buffalo Wild Wings. And it was the Monday night NBA finals game being played Monday night, but it was Tuesday morning in Australia. It was 10 o'clock. The place was packed. People were drinking. I was like, holy cow, what is going on? It was like, they're watching the NBA finals game. So like for us to complain about, oh, we've got an all day Sunday, like inconvenience, like no one even knows what international fans are willing to do for the game. So
yeah. And I'm sympathetic. It's your sport still.
Yep.
But we're, as I say, we're really, really happy that it's coming this way too. And yeah, those 4:15 a.m. Friday mornings are no fun, but we're used to it. We follow it for a reason, and yeah, no complaints at all.
All right, last question. I'm gonna let you go. Do you see a team being like international officially or no?
No, I can't see it. I can't see the reason why the NFL would go that route right now, because they're achieving what they want to achieve already in terms of global expansion. I think the idea, I think Josh mentioned this the other day, and various figures have said it. And Damakong Su said it. I think Goodell even weighed in on the idea of potentially a Super Bowl here one day. I think that would just create an absolute crap storm in the States if that ever happened. But I can see a game here, a game happening here, a game happening internationally 1 week every week of the season, and potentially many years down the line of Super Bowl. But I think they risk alienating fans back in the States if they go that route. For now, we and I don't pretend I speak on behalf of people
right
over here, are just really, really grateful for the idea that we get 2, 3, 4 games a year. A game in Ireland, Croke Park, happened for the first time this year. That was monumental. As long as it continues to grow this way, ace as far as we're concerned. But yeah, I can never see a team here. Really, it's actually what I did my university dissertation on. Went in with a very preconceived idea that it was going to happen, and then realized that it was logistically, financially, and for various other reasons not likely to happen anytime soon. Sorry to say.
Well, I think you're entitled to use the word "we" because you're part of the NFL media now, so that you're entitled to that pronoun. You can use the "we" because you're speaking for we now. So.
But you'll ask the next guy over or next person over, and they'd be like, "Yeah, let's get a team. We definitely support a team." But yeah, that's just my personal opinion.
No, and I think that's a very shared one. That's kind of like they got a good thing going. The NFL does. They can play very international markets. They can do the Brazil games. They can do, Germany. They can do obviously a couple places in England now. Just to kind of grow
Spain,
that market.
Yeah,
Spain. Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. So. All right, sir. That's going to do it for this episode of the IDP After Show. I want to thank Jase again for coming back on to the IDP After Show, something that you had a huge part in making. It is what it is today, so appreciate all of that you've done for that. Also for sharing some fantastic knowledge about the game that we all love. Please make sure you follow him and catch all of his great content that he does over at the IDPshow.com as well as DLF. Speaking of following, if you're not doing so already, please make sure you hit that like and subscribe button so you're always made aware of all the great content that's being dropped constantly here all week long. Joining me next week will be Joey the Tooth from Football Guys as we take a look at the Week 8 IDP landscape. Until then, for Jason and myself, we say thank you for coming on. Best of luck to you and your teams in Week 7, and take care.
This was the IDP After Show.